The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is the case when we see the Pharisees getting together with the Herodians, who were completely opposite them, in that the Pharisees were strictly religious and the Herodians were not religious at all, but in order to try to trap Jesus. And so we can admire Jesus as he uses his wit really to outsmart them. And so we hear that familiar quote in the gospel, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Of course, here we find simple but profound wisdom and enduring truth. Because we do owe to Caesar, or to our governments, our taxes for all the services that are supplied to us. And we know that if we should somehow forget to do so, we will surely be reminded by the IRS. But the answer as to what we owe God isn't specifically spelled out for us by Jesus. And if it isn't contemplated and discerned, it's easy for people to fail to render what is actually due. Just as Caesar's image was on that coin, in contrast, it is God's image that is on all humanity. We are the crowning glory of all God's creation. Yes, that we have intellect and will, that we have memory, that we are self-aware, that we know there's a future, that we're self-determining, governed by reason more than mere animal instinct. These and many others are all traits that prove that we have been created in the image and likeness of God. And so, in turn, we do owe God something. And it's actually easily summarized in three things. We owe God our worship, we owe God our obedience, and we owe God our service. It is in worship that we acknowledge God as our Creator and Redeemer, from whom we come and to whom we are one day destined to return. God is the source of life here and now, and the absolute only hope of life hereafter. So it is only right and just that we live as people who acknowledge God as the giver of every good gift, and who are thus grateful to God always, yet who pause on a day designated by God each week to join with other believers to remember God and render him our thanks and praise. So worship is essential to that obedience that we owe to God, who has commanded that we love him and that we love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. So service of God by charity to our neighbor is the way we fulfill our obedience to God and concretely express our love. Indeed, charity is the way that we make love real. Professor Brant Petrie, a noted theologian in our day, in his teachings on worships, invited us to imagine that we would meet someone who claims they truly, deeply love us and want to marry us. But once we say yes, they then say, well, and it's only sufficient to spend an hour or two with you once a year, if necessary. He says, break the engagement. Don't believe them. Thus, those who claim to love God, yet who seldom make even an hour a week set aside to pause and worship him, are only kidding themselves. They are not fooling God. Likewise, We can't claim to love God whom we cannot see if we are failing to love the neighbor whom we can see. So we must always remember that love in this context doesn't mean deep emotional bonds of romantic, familial, or fraternal love. Those bonds are reserved for a very few people in all our lives. As a matter of fact, fulfillment of God's command to love neighbor doesn't even require us to like those neighbors, but rather love them insofar as we would want for them exactly what we want for ourselves. And if it's in our power to assist them in obtaining that or to prevent them from losing it, especially when it comes to the most basic necessities of life, we would not refuse to do so. Obviously, love of neighbor, even those whom we might consider our enemies, entails never deliberately harming them, either in word or action, nor ever acting or failing to act in ways that would jeopardize their safety and well-being or ever deprive them of life. So implied in this simple passage are the basics of all that we as God's children truly need to know and to do. Indeed, we who are created in God's likeness, who are infinitely blessed by his love and goodness, and privileged to share in his gift of gifts, which is life for time and eternity. O God, our gratitude always, but we must express it deliberately, intentionally, and formally as we gather with other believers each Sunday. And we owe him obedience to his great commandment and our service of him through love of neighbor each and every day. So let us render our worship, our obedience, our service faithfully and unbegrudgingly, and out of authentic love and concern for the eternal well-being of others. Never hesitate to remind them of their obligation to do exactly the same.